Hello, and welcome to the MKG podcast. This podcast helps demand gen marketers grow their company's business through the right means, messaging, media, and measurement. I'm your host, Carrie Gard, and to help me introduce today's guest, I have our digital marketing strategist, Christina Kay. Christina, thank you for joining me again.
Thank you for having me, Carrie. I love being on this podcast.
I love having you. And we actually had a great conversation last week. This is, as a reminder to our listeners, this is part 2 of my interview with JoAnne Jaspan, where we have covered pre-sales call and half of what happens on a discovery call when you are selling a product or selling anything, quite frankly. I think this works. Christina, I don't know if you would agree, but I feel like this her method would work anywhere, with anyone.
Oh, of course. Yeah, I think it's, anyone and everywhere.
Definitely. And it worked great for you. We had a great conversation last week about your retail experience on how you sell at a retail store, which was fantastic. If you have not listened to last week, you are going to be incredibly lost this week. So I recommend that you stop right now on episode 2 and go listen to episode 1 first, because this is a 2-parter and part 1 does relate to part 2 very succinctly. So stop, go listen to part 1. We'll wait right here. We'll see you in about 45 minutes. For all you listeners who have already listened to part 1, thank you for joining us for part 2. We're very excited to share with you how you actually close a deal on a discovery call. And sometimes closing the deal doesn't actually happen on the call. There is a whole bunch of steps you want to take post-call that JoAnne and I talk through. And I was thoroughly educated on this whole podcast. I don't know about you, Christina. Luckily, you already have somewhat of a sales background where this is why I have Mike as my counterpart, because he is my sales guy. And yep. I rely on him for that, because this is not my forte, but it's yours. And this certainly spoke to you. So hopefully it'll speak to our listeners. And here we go. JoAnne Jaspan, round 2. Check it out.
I do find that. I mean, I was on a sales call with Mike for a client, it must have been a year ago now, but it sticks with me because we actually followed, what's interesting, we actually followed a script that was used on us from a tool that we ended up buying, and we pretty much used their script. And they did where they just opened up about all of the challenges that they're facing, and they just kept going. And we were like, we were worried about it.
We
like, this is
love
amazing.
Those calls. Yeah.
Because then you can repeat it back to them and say, this is what I heard. This is what and this is the challenge that I hear that you're facing, which opens the door really easily.
Yes. Gosh, I'm so glad you brought that up. 2 parts of it. One, just that, you did experience that like opening of the floodgates, and all of a sudden they're giving you all of these juicy details and like nuggets of information. But 2, repeating back to them, it's a way of getting continuous buy-in. You know how we talked about earning the right at the very beginning of the call, like, hey, how does that sound to you? If they give you an information and you're like, okay, so I just want to make sure I'm understanding everything, or I'm not missing anything, or, put it in your own words.
Or this was the big thing I heard. Like for us in that conversation, there was just one glaring theme, and it was something we could easily latch onto and say, we have solved that problem. Here are some examples of it. Happy to put you in touch with the customers and not just hear from us. And, we'd really love to help you out with this challenge.
That's so great. Yeah. That's so great. And I think what you do in the process is like, if you're like, so did I understand that correctly? You just said, what I'm understanding is, this is happening because of this change, and because you have new management or a new location, it's causing stress on this. And did I get that right? And when they say yes, or they say yes, and it's like getting there. It's that pass, go, collect $200. It's like your signal to kind of keep going. Because sometimes you do, we have this thing called confirmation bias, where we hear what we want to hear, called happy years in sales. So it really is a valuable sort of measure to just make sure you're not interpreting things that fit into what you want to hear, or that literally that you didn't miss anything, or it gives them a chance to even add more more color to that. So it's a great thing to do. Did you guys, I'm curious, Carrie, for that script where they told you so much, did you build up to that? Like, how did you get to the point where they were like, yes, let's just tell you everything that you need?
I think it was a unique conversation because we were like the 7th call they were having. And I think they were just really fatigued. And we were like, well, what are you looking for? Like, and that question, because they were looking for an agency. They already knew that. They already knew they needed help with SEO. They already knew that. And they were just so fatigued. It was like, well, why are you fatigued? Why are you having this conversation for the 7th time? Like, well, this is what we're looking for. And it was this, they didn't want the canned, well, we do an audit. They didn't want the canned response of the process. They wanted to know, like, we're looking for the Hail Marys. We're looking for the big ideas. We're looking for real solutions and not just the normal process. We're like, we've done that and here's how we've helped. So we were in a unique situation where they had already been like through 7 of these and they were like, why are we talking to you?
I love this example because what it illustrates, other than just, great instinct and great empathy and, really high kind of EQ, it really illustrates how you guys differentiated yourself. And you didn't do it by price. You didn't say, you talked to 7 other people, give us the lowest quote, we're going to beat that. Like that's used car salesman stuff, right? You didn't do it by sort of starting the call with like, so let me tell you about our agency and why we're so good and why you're going to want to work with us. You didn't say, like, you didn't try to compete on these things that, like regulatory compliance or features or process. You differentiated yourself in the way you engage with them. You made your conversation customer centric. You just said, like, you were genuinely curious. Wow, 7 calls. Okay, why haven't you found what you're looking for? Like, what are you looking for? And just that very simple act of being curious and not assuming why you're going to be best for them, it immediately built trust, right? They opened
and it just
up,
so happened,
everything.
And it just so happened that the problem that they were having, we had a real solution to, and we could prove it through actual case studies. It wasn't like we were trying to squeeze a square peg in a round hole. I think if they showed up and they're like, well, this is exactly what we're looking for, and we didn't have that solution, we would have said, well, I'm sorry, like, once again, this is a dead end for you. So we're just going to call it here.
And on that note, gosh, we could talk, we could do this for months, but on that point, I think even that, don't write that off. Today, their challenge may not be what you have to offer. But if you say to them, gosh, you're looking for a very specific technical thing and we don't do that, I'd like to recommend these, these vendors. We vetted them. Mm-hmm. We think the world of them. Here's why don't you call Bill, or why don't you call Joe at this number? Or, here's how you get in touch with them. When their business grows or changes, they're going to remember you as that really, you behaved with integrity. You didn't try to be like, oh yeah, we can do that. We can do that for you. You know what I mean? Yeah. So, or they're going to be in some kind of industry setting where someone else is going to say, gosh, we really need someone to help with SEO. And you're going to come to mind. So you're getting value out of that, of behaving that way with them. And you're really just differentiating yourself in a way that is all through your actions rather than, here's our features, here's our price.
Right. So we've heard all their we've asked these questions. We used the, I forget who wrote the book, but it's called Start With Why. So you've done the anything
Simon
else
Sinek.
Sort of. Yes. Thank you. So you've done the anything else sort of opening up and trying to get more and going in depth. So how do you move out of that and into actually getting to your solution, assuming it's
so what I would do is, and also it's like, if you have an hour with them or do a half an hour with them, I always kind of ask at the beginning, just as like a housekeeping tip, like, hey, do we have a hard stop tonight? Depending on how our conversation goes, do we have a little extra time if we need it? Always be cognizant of their time. And if they're like giving you tons of information and a conversation is going great, but you only have 5 minutes left, I would sort of say, this has been so interesting, or, we've learned so much and I see so much potential here. I do want to be respectful of your time. We have 5 minutes left. So what I'd like to do, and then kind of redirect and say, it sounds like we still need to talk about X, Y, and Z. So let's schedule some time to do that. And before, the time that we have left, let me just kind of chat with you about some of what you've said that's really stood out to me and how I think we can help, and then sort of, I would give them enough to, you don't have to, go into excruciating detail, but give them enough to kind of give them a taste that they want to come back and learn more. And if you're not running out of time, then I would sort of, it's kind of like you said, saying, so, okay, I want to just tell you, thanks for all that information. And you might say, in the course of our conversation today, you said 3 key things that have really stood out to me because it's really familiar. We've worked with a lot of other businesses in Seattle or a lot of other manufacturers to help solve these exact challenges. And I think that, if you're open to it, I'd love to just kind of explain a little bit about our process and how we do that. Again, you're getting buy-in. You're not just telling them you're going to do it. And if they're like, yeah, then, explain to them. I think a lot of what you can do is say, kind of like you did, Carrie, say, I'd love to follow up by sending you a couple case studies that we have. If your business does customer referrals at this stage of the process, you can offer that. And, just say, or I think our next meeting, we should take a look at the tool, or we should take a look at the process and actually, kind of work it in. I think if you've got their buy-in and if they're interested and if you've been listening and if you've been able to repeat back to them, the other thing is sort of along the way, if they say, well, we're really challenged by growing so fast. That's a great time for you. You sort of don't need to wait to the end. You might be like, oh gosh, yeah, that is a challenge that we see so often right now. In fact, we just recently ended an engagement, or we're currently working with X company, and then you tell a story. They came to us because they had gone from 10 employees to 200 employees in a year, and all of a sudden their existing manual processes were just too much to handle. And I actually started by speaking to the marketing person, but we ended up, kind of getting the finance team involved as well. And the way that we helped them was, and you're telling them a story and you're showing them how you might be able to do the same for them. So you sort of don't even really need to wait till the end for that either.
And how does that work? It's a little different for Mike and I, right? Because he's not only the salesperson, but he's also somebody who's doing some of the pulling the string through, right? All the way to writing the contract and getting sign off and all of that into the execution piece of it. So having not worked with a lot of sales teams in terms of knowing their in and outs and day to day, how can they pull those examples? Is it something that they already have? Is it something that off of their own experience is like?
So depending on the company stage, really early stage companies may not have the stuff dialed in, but typically you will have, case studies in a accessible, your marketing team or sales team will kind of select case studies that speak to, if your customer is in this vertical or if this is their challenge or, if they're trying to solve for this, and you can, kind of just go and refer to those.
So there's kind of like a script that's sort of
it's like a piece of collateral, like a one-pager,
okay.
a PDF that might have the company's name, their challenge, how you help them, what the result was. If that isn't baked in or already done, then, it's a little bit more manual work for the sales rep that I would talk to my teammates. I would find out hey, who's had a customer like this, or who can think of a win where this was the problem they presented with, or, just by talking to account managers or marketing people, but use your team, really work together, to create that kind of case study or customer story that you can fit in. People remember stories, not statistics, right? So the more color and sort of personalization and storytelling you can weave into your conversation, I think the more it sticks and the more they remember that. It helps. But our brains make buying decisions. I think I mentioned this already, but from that emotional part of our brains, not sort of the fact rational ones. So stories help. When we hear stories, our brains light up, all our learning centers, we release dopamine, all this great stuff happens. Whereas none of that happens when you just say, like, we've helped 4 companies achieve optimal SEO. So that storytelling is good. But we can certainly talk more about how to create, compelling business cases or compelling case studies. I think that's great stuff to follow up with. And do you want to touch on kind of following up after the call, or do you think we should put a pin in it for now?
We can certainly put a pin in that. I think a lot of the marketing teams, especially that I work with, have a lot of that collateral. It's just making sure that the sales team has access to it, and then having the sales managers and whoever sort of runs the sales team. I think that's just such a great thing to always sort of put in their back pocket so that they have these things on hand. Because it was easy for Mike and I, because we've done it, but I not sort of understanding big sales teams and how that works.
Oh yeah. I mean, absolutely. Those teams need to support each other, marketing, sales, and you need to arm your sales team with some really well thought out good collateral that they can use. Part of the success of your sales process is you can have the best call ever, but if there isn't meaningful follow up, it's a real detractor. So having things ready to go that you can send them about your process or about case studies or whatever the case may be, you should have those. And that's kind of part of de-siloing those sales and marketing functions.
Right. So the call doesn't so once the call ends, regardless of how you've decided whether that's another follow-up conversation to align on if you've run out of time, or if it's a follow-up conversation about pricing or next steps, whatever the case may be, there's probably what you're saying is, this is the first call that's ever happened. There's probably going to be a second call. You're never really going to close the deal on that.
I mean, call. Yeah, I've seen one call closes, few and far between, but typically if we're talking about, any kind of complex solution with a price tag that's not just a quick transactional purchase, there's going to be multiple calls. Often the person that you'll start talking to, that person may become what we kind of call your internal champion. But the average company, when they're making like a big purchasing decision, the buying committee or the number of decision makers involved averages 7.6. So the idea that you have to win over one buyer, that's not relevant anymore. So most likely there will be multiple calls. And one of the things that I find really, really helpful in differentiating yourself and serving your buyer is to, at the end of the call, at the end of that first call, you want to kind of start to draw up a mutual action plan, a map. And it does a couple things. It kind of ensures that your buyer has some skin in the game. Again, it's kind of testing them. You want to make sure that, some of your buyers are just really polite people and they just don't want to say no to you, even though they have no intention of moving forward. And the sooner you can figure that out, the sooner you can go and spend that time, those resources, again, pursuing leads that have a higher propensity to close. So I like to say, it sounds like we've got a great fit here. On our next call, I think what's going to be really important as the next step is to kind of talk about your team and who else is involved and how your company makes purchasing decisions like this. So why don't we set up a time to do that? And in the meantime, and then how does that sound to you? And if they're like, oh, no, I don't want to bring my boss into this, that's sort of a red flag. Why don't they want to bring their boss into it? Are they the ultimate decision maker? Do they have that authority, that kind of thing?
Mm-hmm.
But if they're like, yeah, that sounds great, that's kind of a good sign that they are serious. But usually after a good call like that, or any call, I would send a summary letter, and it would just say, hey, Carrie, it was so great speaking with you today. Really enjoyed it, whatever. And then I would say, here are the 3 key takeaways that I took from our conversation. These are the 3 main challenges, or this is how you describe the challenge to me. And then I would say, I have a strong belief that, shift sales and marketing can really help solve this challenge. And then really specific, here's how we would do that. And list 3 things, like, we would address this by doing this. So you don't just want to say something like, in other words, you don't just want to say like, hey, Carrie, great call. I know we can help you. I'm really excited. Let's get together again. Let's talk again next week. Like, get specific, recap what they told you and why you believe you can help and the impact that will have.
And then you just wait to hear back if you don't hear?
I don't just wait to hear back. I put really specific guidelines. I mean, first of all, I try to get their buy-in I try to get them to schedule the next call while we are still on the call. That's the best time to do it. Like, hey, let's just take this last minute to take a look at our calendars and see when we can do this next call.
Mm-hmm.
So the more, if they're like, oh, I don't know, or, let me look, I'm not saying it's a deal killer, but it's an indication. So the last thing you want is, well, why don't I think about it and I'll call you in 2 weeks. Like that is kind of a kiss of death. Like, let me think about it and call you in 2 weeks. That's kind of like checks in the mail. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I try to get them to commit to a date on the phone, but there are legitimate reasons, that people may not be able to do that then and there. So then I would say, okay, no problem. What I'm going to do is I'm going to send you sort of a recap summary letter. And in that, I'm going to highlight sort of some of the key takeaways I got from our conversation. And I'm going to briefly address how, XYZ solutions can help and kind of the results that we think, the outcomes that we think we could drive for you. And then I'm going to put a couple dates at the bottom, and if you can just get back to me with which one works best, and if none of those work best, please suggest another one. Then I would send that off so there's like a clear call to action. So does Tuesday the 17th at 2 o'clock work? And if you don't hear back from them, a lot of sales is about consistent follow-up. Sometimes it takes 8, 12, 13 touches to even get a lead on the phone to agree on a meeting. So it really does take sort of perseverance and consistency. But hopefully you will hear back. I mean, again, it's a good sign if they have some skin in the game, if they're trying to move this forward. Whenever I can, I try to assign a little piece of homework. And I know that sounds funny, but it's a way to sort of test their level of commitment to this process. So if I say to them, it would be really interesting. On our next call, I would love to do a quick analysis of which keywords are getting, the most traffic for you. And they might say, oh, I don't know. And then I'd be like, okay, is that something that you can find out? Is that something that you can pull from some files? And, so they say, yeah. Say, okay, great. So why don't we do this? For our next call, if you can email me a list of 5 words or, your employee files or whatever it is that you're looking for. What I will do is I will prepare a little analysis, and then I think we should review that to make sure everything sounds good. And as long as we didn't miss anything, our next step will be to present that to your boss. What do you think? Do you see what I'm doing there?
Yeah.
So I'm kind of, if they say to me no, or if they agree to do it and then they don't do it, these are all signs that you sort of, you can sort of start to rate how warm an opportunity is.
Yeah, and we have something similar, and I don't know if we still do this, so I will have Mike correct me later. But either we still do it or we used to do it, where we'd actually have a client fill in what we call a discovery doc, where we'd say, okay, this was really great. For our next step, when we get on the phone, it'd be really great to have this filled in so we know what tools you have, what keywords you're interested in, and the list is kind of long because we want to know how much skin they have in the game. If they take the time to go fill this in, we know that this is going to be a good deal to pursue. And if they really take their time, if they don't fill it all in, if it's not happening, then we say, okay, maybe this isn't the right fit for us. And so we do something, or at least we used to do something similar, which was really helpful in qualifying the lead essentially for moving forward.
Yeah, that's perfect. I mean, having some kind of device in place where you can sort of check or test the level of sort of sincerity about their buying process, because you're going to talk to all kinds of people. You're going to talk to people who maybe saw, a webinar of yours or heard you mentioned at a conference or something, and they're kind of calling because they're vaguely curious, but meanwhile they're thinking, yeah, this would be good to bring on in 2 years, or, all the way to the people that are like actively, definitely looking to make a decision and move forward. And so I think understanding, where they're at, I mean, one way to understand that is to directly ask, of course, but also
Right.
to do little things like that. Like if they can't be bothered, I always like to ask the question, do I care about this more than they do? Am I fighting to solve this for them more than they are? And if the answer is yes, that's not a good ratio,
Right.
So if you send them, don't overwhelm them with like, I would never be like, yeah, I'm going to need you to write me a 10-page, assessment
dissertation.
of, like, don't do something that they're like, oh my God. But, just a little commitments. I mean, they could do in half an hour or, tell us what tools you're currently using, like fill out the sheet. That's excellent. And if they don't do it, you kind of have to ask yourself why. And if they do, that just gives you all the more information to say, oh, that's so great. I see you're using this and we integrate perfectly with that. So that's always a great sign, or, it just gives you more information. It's really, I think, important to do that, even if the homework is, hey, could you, next time come with a list of people who you think this affects, or, I mean, there's so many different devices you can use, but some little activity or something that shows, their skin in the game, that they've got some.
Well, JoAnne, this has been amazingly helpful, and we definitely I have a whole list of topics that you and I can follow up on and have
That's so funny, me too. I've been taking little notes and being like, ooh, next time we should talk about,
Yeah, so listeners, there will be a next time. JoAnne is clearly a amazing resource for this topic, and I definitely have some follow-up and would even love to hear from you guys if you have any questions for JoAnne or any topics that you'd like us to cover. I'd be happy to follow up with JoAnne on those as well and get her back on here. But this has been great, and I think we have a pretty clear list on how to basically have that initial discovery call, from doing the initial prep and understanding who it is you're talking to then getting people to open up on a call with you and creating that transparency and that authenticity in having that conversation, to then knowing that the conversation doesn't stop there and to follow up in a thoughtful way and to know that there's skin in the game on both sides. I think there's just such a clear path of execution here. So thank you, JoAnne, for sharing that with us. And I look forward to our next conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation, Carrie, and I look forward to next time.
So that was part 2 of my conversation with JoAnne. And wow, I hope you took notes, people. Seriously. Christina, did you take notes?
I did. I had a notebook right next to me for both times I listened, and both times I had 2 different things I was listening that really like stood out to me. So it was kind of cool. It's like reading your favorite book and you see different things a different way. It was listening to it 2 different times and resonating in me different ways. So it was awesome.
You've been on both sides of sales, where you've actually done the selling and the customer experience and the upselling, but you've also been, we both have, I've definitely been sold to, everybody's been sold to in some fashion, but in marketing, specifically as in media and advertising, we have vendors call us on the regular.
Oh yeah.
And did you ever have an experience with a vendor specifically that actually resonated with you, where you felt like it was sort of the JoAnne Jaspan way of doing things and it worked for you? As somebody in sales, getting sold to is, I'm sure you look at it with a much more critical eye than most people. And so have you ever had anybody sort of win you over?
Oh yeah. So I have this, it's a very long story, but I'm gonna kind of condense it for you guys. So at the time I was living in Tampa, Florida, and I was working at a technology company, and I was the lead there for everything like inbound marketing, digital marketing. And I also worked a lot with sales just to kind of communicate back and forth what's going on in terms of emails going out and ads and things like that. And so I really needed a software to help me with SEO and keyword research just to kind of prove to the sales team and leaders that, hey, like we need to focus on these certain things. So I signed up for a webinar and it was like great. And then I got this phone call on my work phone and the area code was 440, and that's from Cleveland, Ohio, where I'm from. And normally I don't pick up my work phone because it's always salespeople. And so I was like, I don't want to like do
I
it
had
this
a list.
today. No.
Oh, yeah, I had a list of numbers to avoid on my work phone for sure.
I'm busy. I don't want to deal with this right now. Sometimes I picked it up, whatever. But I picked it up because I was like, maybe something's wrong with my family, like back home in Cleveland. I picked it up and he was like, hi, this is blank. I'm not going to say his name, but he'll know exactly I'm talking about him. But and I was like, oh my gosh. And he like was talking. He was like, do you have a like time to talk today, or like set up time to talk? And I was like, hey, honestly, like, could I be honest with you? And he was like, sure. Like, the only reason why I picked up this phone call is because it's a Cleveland number. And because I'm from Cleveland. I said I'm from Cleveland. My family's from there. I'm living in Tampa, blah, 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 blah. And then he's like, oh, like my wife's family is like in Tampa too. And then we started talking. And then I was like, hey, you know what? Let's talk tomorrow. Like, I really do like want to hear about this software. And so we went on and this was right around the time too when Ohio State was in national championship, and we were talking about LeBron and everything like that. And so it was kind of cool to like see this relationship spiral. But in my head, I'm like, I feel like I'm not even being sold to, because it's something that he's like working hard for, and I feel like he's just part of my team and that he's helping me get this software to help the organization. And from there, every place I went after that company, I like brought him with me essentially to like help me get the product to the company. And becoming that salesperson and like that person's favorite salesperson per se, it's a hard task to do, but once you do it, you'll honestly have a customer for life. And he didn't have to do much except listen to me and adapt to my language and adapt to my style, becoming that friend essentially. And he is still one of my friends to this day. And it's just the way he did it. I couldn't say no. And that's like
and he ended up recruiting you. You actually went and worked for that company.
Yes. I did. It was so funny. And that it just shows you too the trust he had in me. Like, we've never worked together, but him like putting his neck on the line for me, saying like, hey, this girl's awesome. Let's get her in here. Like, she's awesome at marketing, but she's also good at sales, and the customer success role would be perfect for her because it's combining both. And he, to this day, is probably still one of my favorite salesperson. And if anybody needed the software, I'd say call him.
Yes.
And it's a skill to learn, but I also feel like it's a skill you do have to have mistakes at too, because it's a learning experience in that. And I also feel like that approach is probably not going to work for everybody, and not even a salesperson or the prospect, because it's really that personality, and learning your own personality and shining that through is good for post and like pre-sales and post-sales. It's like a circle effect or something like that kind of ties everything together.
And you guys naturally had the planets sort of align between, you know, him calling from Cleveland, his wife being from Florida. So there was nice tie-ins there. And there are always going to be, I think JoAnne even says this in the podcast, you're not always going to have this perfect, beautiful tie-in, but finding a way to connect with them on a personal level is going to go way further in creating that relationship. And you might not even get the sale in that moment. I mean, while this person was calling you about this product after the webinar, you couldn't even buy the product because the decision maker was leaving, right?
Mm-hmm. So it was like, I was like, oh my gosh, they're going to hate me. We are literally at the end of the deal. Like, cause I know at this place, they like ring a big like gong when they get a big deal. Like it was going to be great for him because it would have been awesome. And I was like, please don't hate me. Like, I was like, oh my gosh. So then after that, like everybody started leaving. Like he kind of saw it on LinkedIn because he has like Sales Navigator.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, hey, like this other position looks good for you. Like you should like apply for it. And then this was not at the place he even worked at. And so I applied, I got in, and then I helped him get like on the software. And they were at the time the place was using the competing software. And so they jumped shipped per se of the old software and went on to this one. So it's a cool story. And then working with him post that was pretty awesome. And
he got to ring the gong eventually.
He did. And just seeing him like in action and even like training people when we worked at the same place. I'm like, wow, this guy is so good. And even for post sales calls, or if I was having some like troubles with a customer, I would have him on the line and I'd be like, hey, can you give me some like pointers on how I could maybe communicate this better, things like that. And he would help. Or I would say, hey, can you lead this call so I can see how you do it, and just so I can learn myself. And he's just it's just amazing. And I was fortunate, and I guess he was fortunate too for me to pick up the phone just because it said 440 on the number, which I still like laugh about to this day. Because even now, if my cell phone rings 440, I'm like, I'm not picking it up if I don't know the number. Like,
Yes.
There's there's so many telemarketers to this, like not even just like marketing software, just everything. Like most of them are like car warranties. I'm like, my car, it's whatever. But it's just
cold calling is probably the hardest thing to do nowadays.
Oh, yeah.
That is for sure.
Especially with the iPhone now having it say telemarketer or like scam risk. I'm like, that's awful for that person. They have to be a really good salesperson at that point. But
yes,
but that's a thing to combat, in those sense of cold calling environments. But it's tying everything into like pre-sale and post-sale and kind of carrying them through that journey. I feel like the person shouldn't feel like they're in a customer journey. It should just be a natural feeling, because if they feel like they're being like sold to, they're not going to want to buy more or renew. And that's for me, like in the sense of when I'm selling clothes at the clothing store, if I feel like I'm pushing clothes down their throat and things that they're not going to wear, they are never going to come back to the store. They're never going to want to work with me again. If I listen to them and I find what they need, and I'm like, hey, this looks good, or hey, like I see you're wearing a lot of like purple. Have you ever thought about green and really bring out your eyes? I think it would look good. Compliment them and make them feel good, and they're going to come back and make it more natural instead of, oh, like we have all of these things here, you should have them, So,
all of them. You want everything.
Exactly. Like how you were listening for like what they need for pricing, that you could give them what pricing is, but it would be that maximum amount. But listen for what they want and tailoring it to what they need will keep that customer for life.
Listening, such an important skill.
Yes.
Yeah, in everything in life. The listener. Well, thank you so much, Christina, for sharing your experience and how JoAnne has impacted how you're going to move forward. I think that's so great and so helpful to know that, even a well-experienced salesperson could take something away from this call. I obviously learned a lot, sales not being my main forte. She's right, though. We're all selling something. If you'd like to learn more about JoAnne Jaspan and her company, Shift Sales and Marketing, you can find her on LinkedIn. I'll also have all the details below for you. Give her a shout. Let her know you listened and that you learned lots. And if you would like her to come in and help your sales team pick up some of these tips and tricks, be sure to give her a call and to reach out. This is our final episode of the season. Thank you so much for listening to the MKG podcast, where we help demand gen marketers grow their company's businesses through the right means, messaging, media, and measurement. See you next year.